Hello, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name, as always, is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in on this lovely Thursday afternoon. We have a great show ahead. We're going to begin to preview these divisional round games here. One in the NFC between the Commanders and Lions today, and another in the AFC between the Houston Texans and Kansas City Chiefs. Then we're going to be jumping into the world of basketball for a little bit, talking about the interesting sweepstakes in terms of where Jimmy Butler might end up if he will leave this free agency cycle. And then we're going to ask and answer a question a lot of people have about a certain team in the Eastern Conference, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Is this meteoric rise to the top of the Eastern Conference standings for real? Well, we'll soon find out. And then to conclude today's show, we're going across the pond, returning to the news of Didier Deschamps stepping down and who could potentially replace him, and why I believe Zinedine Zidane could be the guy for the job. Before we get into any of that, I want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network if you do feel so inclined and you want to keep more up to date with all the content for this show and other shows around the network as well. But if you want to contribute and interact a little bit more directly with all of our shows while we are live streaming, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way, as always, to contribute and interact with the show. Just makes it that much better. It is genuinely appreciated by all here at the network for everything you do to give your input to our shows in advance. But without further ado, let's jump right into our first segment of today's show, talking about the Commanders-Lions NFC Divisional Round matchup, and it's an interesting one. I really love this matchup right off the bat. I don't necessarily think that this will be a huge blowout like people predict. I do think that the Lions have the capability to pull away from this feisty Commanders team late, but I don't necessarily think that the Commanders are just going to roll over and play dead, going into a hostile road environment, quickly becoming one of the most hostile road environments in the league in Ford Field. Now, I do think that the keys to victory for Washington are a little bit more complicated, though, than people might first assume, just because of the multiplicity of the Lions' offense and just because this Lions' defense is not as rusty as people say it is because of how depleted it also is. I do think that the Commanders are going to have a much rougher go of it than they did against Tampa Bay, and I do think that the Lions are just an offense that you can't really defend head-on like you can do against Tampa. You can take away some aspects of Tampa's offense, but you can't take most of the aspects that make Detroit's offense special away as well, because they have so many ways to attack you. They're getting back David Montgomery on the offense side of the football, and Sonic and Knuckles are going to be probably ready to go, and then you have to slow down that receiving core with Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams, and then Sam Laporta there, do everything tight end. So it's going to be a daunting task for a Washington defense that did look very lively in the game against Tampa Bay. And I'm not saying that they can't do it, but I do think that this game will fall squarely on the shoulders of Jaden Daniels in terms of the Commanders staying in it. And so that's where I start to think about Jaden Daniels' impact, not just on this season for Washington, but in the future as well, because he is someone who I really, truly believe is already cementing his path as one of the best Commanders quarterbacks in their history. And I think that no matter whether or not he pulls off the upset, he's had a remarkable rookie season that has laid the foundation for an incredible purple patch, or a bright patch, for the Washington Commanders in their future. And I feel like, this will be the perfect litmus test for, say, a rookie quarterback's trajectory. And when I look at similarities between Jaden Daniels and other rookie quarterbacks that have done this kind of thing before, as only 4 of them have, I'm kind of drawn to the Russell Wilson comparison a little bit, because this Commanders team, sound familiar, is led by someone from that Legion of Boom staff in that organization, and they have a Legion of Boom defender with him as well in Bobby Wagner. They have that Legion of Boom feel. They haven't really gotten to that level on defense, but I like all of their young studs in the secondary, much like I loved all the Legion of Boom guys as a Seattle fan back then. And Jaden Daniels, I feel like, he's not necessarily Russell Wilson in that he doesn't necessarily have a lot of offensive weapons to work with, because he does have Terry McLaurin and he has a somewhat better offensive line, but they do have similarities in terms of their play style. It's just that I think Jaden Daniels has an opportunity to grow beyond what Russell Wilson even became, because that's how talented he truly is. And he also has an opportunity, like Russell Wilson, to try and win a divisional round game on the road yet again. Because remember, in Russ's rookie season, he went on the road twice, and it was in Atlanta where he led them to the precipice of an upset there, and it came down to a last-second field goal. And while I don't necessarily think this game will go exactly like that game those many years ago, I do think that Jaden Daniels will prove that he is here to stay, and potentially maybe in his second or third year, like Russell Wilson, lead his team to the Super Bowl with that Dan Quinn, Bobby Wagner mentality still with them. But going up against the Lions, we can't necessarily disregard what they have done this season. Just because I might try to justify this game being closer than it looks on paper, I still think that we have to give the Lions their flowers, because this very well could be a blowout game. And I do think that the Lions are perfectly capable of playing a shootout-like game against this Washington Commanders team. But at the end of the day, no matter what happens, this Lions team has made it. And yes, Dan Campbell is right in saying they may not make it back ever again, and this could be their only opportunity to really make a run of it in this weird, messy NFC side of the bracket. But I do think that the Lions have announced themselves on the NFL stage as a team to be reckoned with for the next couple of years. And I do think that it all comes down to these players believing in this identity no matter who goes and who leaves, because a lot of people on this staff are going to leave, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn notwithstanding. And I do think that even if they leave, the Lions will still find a way. This team, no matter what happens to them, dig deep. They're a resilient bunch, and they've gotten to this point not necessarily just because of excellent coaching, but because they've bought into this culture and identity that Dan Campbell has laid forth. And Dan Campbell, let's not forget, feels like he's in it for the long run. So you already have your foundational piece sticking with you for the long run. And so no matter who comes in, who stays, who goes, I do think that the Lions are set up for a dominant run in the NFC for years to come. But with a team like Washington, this is a team that in a couple years is going to be light years better than what they are right now and can present different challenges. This is kind of not necessarily a litmus test for the Lions in terms of maintaining and sustaining their level of dominance in the NFC. But let's say 2-3 years down the road, this game shows up in a championship game setting, chances are it'll be much tougher. And chances are guys on your staff and maybe your players on your roster, some of them might be gone. And this game will look a lot more level. So right now, the Lions might actually want to win this game going away, just because they may not ever get another game like this against an opponent like the Washington Commanders, who are an up-and-coming team, ever again. From here on out, the Detroit Lions are going to get every team's best shot, and it's going to be the same for the next 5 years. And if you're the Washington Commanders and you lose this game in blowout fashion, you're going to be thinking about this. You're going to be thinking about how we can get back to this point, how we can build a team around our franchise quarterback, how our defense can progress, and you're going to get more motivated from a loss like this. But I do think, in comparison to what I was saying before about how these Commanders are like those Seahawks, it doesn't necessarily matter, because both of those teams had this magic element to them. They had quarterbacks who never said die, And they had defenses that could win them football games single-handedly. The Commanders aren't quite there just yet. Their defense is a couple steps behind their offense, but give them a couple of years. Give Dan Quinn the resources, the assets to go out and build up this defense, which is already starting to take shape. It's just that there are a couple of young guys who aren't fitting into the vision, in my opinion, exactly. And then a game like this, of this magnitude, will have much more at stake because these two teams could be more evenly matched. And so while this game is an unusual matchup right now for the Commanders, and it's going to be a daunting task to try and keep up with this elite Lions team, just know this: no matter how the Commanders lose, even if they lose, because I'm not necessarily leaving out the notion that this game could be an upset, because I trust Dayton Daniels that much, and I trust that against this depleted Lions defense he can put up points in a hurry. But if they do lose, and it's either in devastating fashion on the last second play, a mistake made potentially, or in blowout fashion, that means this team will just continue to grow stronger and say, what can we do to overcome this obstacle? Whereas the Lions, they're sitting pretty right now. They're the top dogs in the NFC, and I think that their game plan for this playoffs might be enough for them to lift their first ever Super Bowl. But if I'm the Lions in the next 4 to 5 years, I'm going to have to worry about every single team giving them their best shot. And so that's why I'm looking at this game and saying, yeah, I can see the Lions winning either way. Whether it be on a last-minute field goal, the Commanders push them tough, or in blowout fashion. So we can't necessarily predict, say, a score. I would like to say somewhere in the 33-21, 33-27 range. But I will say this. This game is important for both teams just because the Commanders have somewhere to build from and the Lions have somewhere to fall from. And so if you're a fan of either of these franchises, you're also going to be really invested in this one, but just know that you might also have to be wary about the directions your teams are headed. For the Commanders, it's a bright future, and for the Lions, this could be an ominous sign of things to come if the Commanders do give you a game. Let me know what you think about this game in the comments below, because coming next we transition over to the AFC, another interesting game between the Houston Texans and Kansas City Chiefs to talk about right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like